What's happening, everybody? Welcome to this late night or early morning edition of Syracuse Basketball Postgame, presented by Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. Depending on what coast you're on, depending on how you look at it, no matter how you look at it, Syracuse basketball just dug itself way too deep of a hole against Stanford. They're down 25-2 in the first half, a 23-point deficit. So if you chose to go to bed at that point, if you chose not to watch this game at all, you made the wise move. Syracuse did make a game of this, taking advantage of Stanford's ice-cold shooting in the last 10 minutes of the first half. Stanford was certainly on top of things in the first 10 minutes of the first half. Syracuse made a game of it, but never led. Stanford never trailed, and they win 70-61. So that drops Syracuse to 9-12, 3-7 in ACC play. You got Brent Axe with you here. Thanks to those of you that hung out during the game. Our Syracuse Sports Insiders texting away late into the night, early into the morning on the East Coast. Those of you checking out the post-game show live, appreciate you sickos being up this late and up early this morning to talk some Syracuse basketball. For those of you that are checking this out, maybe on Thursday morning, a little later, you made the reasonable choice in this one here. As look, you can't dig yourself a 23-point hole and expect to be competitive in this game, though Syracuse did threaten to make this a game, got back in this thing. But when you have Jaquan Carlos, and look, he had a great game. He had 16 points, 6 of 6 from the field, hit a couple of threes, dished out 3 assists, 33 minutes off the bench for Carlos. But if Jaquan Carlos is your leading scorer, it is a sign that things went amiss for Syracuse. J.J. Starling just did not have it. 3 of 16 shooting on the night. He was 1 of 7 from three-point range. He finishes with 7 points in 34 minutes. Eddie Lampkin with 12 points and 7 rebounds. So he had 16 less rebounds than he did in the last game. Hard to hold him to that standard. Maxime Reynaud, I'll tell you what, if there was one thing that was worth staying up late to watch this game, it was one of the best players in the country that nobody talks about. Now, if you've been watching ACC basketball, if you know ACC basketball, you know that he has led the league in scoring. He's led the league in rebounding. Cooper Flagg gets all the headlines, and for good reason. Cooper Flagg, who comes to the Dome on Wednesday, by the way, a week from, yesterday now, because it's early Thursday morning. So take a deep breath and get ready for that one. But Cooper Flagg's going to be the top pick in the upcoming NBA draft, if not top 3 pick in the upcoming NBA draft, right? Maxime Reynaud is in that conversation for player of the year in the ACC. He ends up with 21 points and 15 rebounds in this game. He had a double-double in the first half of this game. Syracuse could not handle him, though, Reynaud, 7 of 17 shooting, 3 of 10 from three-point range. He still ends up with 21 and 15. What a player. What a find in the portal, by the way. One of the great transfer portal success stories in college basketball this year. And look, Eddie Lampkin did what he could in the paint, but that guy is just, Reynaud had a key steal on Lampkin down the stretch, kind of picked his pocket, led a break the other way, a huge rebound for Stanford. Late in the game, there was a missed 3, rebound, and then Stanford's going to the free throw line, right? And it became a free throw game down the stretch. They win it 70-61. Another game where Chris Bell, MIA for Syracuse. Now, he did have a couple of threes in the second half. Looked like he was going to spark this team, but he ends up with just 6 points on the night, and that's just kind of scattered scoring. Lucas Taylor only hits a 3. Elijah Moore plays 5 minutes in this game. And guys, as we get ready to flip the calendar to February after, it felt like January was like 43 days long. It is Groundhog Day upcoming this weekend. And the big issue with Syracuse has been their slow starts. And I want to shout out my guy, Ben Burrows, for sending me this stat. We've mentioned this a time or two on the postgame show, how often Syracuse trails at that first timeout, the under 16 timeout that you go into your first break on, right? Here's how it breaks down. Syracuse has trailed at the under 16 timeout in 16 of 21 games this season. They have been outscored by 60 points prior to the first official TV timeout. In the 11 losses for Syracuse prior to them gaining their 12th loss tonight, Syracuse had trailed at the under 16 8 times. So that's now 9 of 12 losses. They've trailed at the under 16. This team's never ready to play. And while Adrian Autry makes some adjustments as the game goes along, they have their moments. They find their stride in chunks of time. I'm not even asking for 40 minutes. I'm asking for 25, 30 solid minutes of basketball. This team did not score in the first 8 minutes of the game. This team was down 25-2, as we mentioned, 23 points. Then Stanford goes ice cold. Stanford had 2 or 3 stretches in this game of about 3.5 minutes where they did not score. The other thing that has killed Syracuse consistently all year long is points off turnovers. So in this game, 14 turnovers, Stanford gains 19 points off of that. That's your ball game. Points off turnovers and your slow start. I mean, 23 points is one thing. Even the 8 to 10 to 12 point leads that Syracuse consistently concedes in the first half. I gave you the numbers there even before the first TV timeout. You cannot consistently do that. 16 of 21 games that has happened coming into this one tonight. That's coaching. That's not having your team ready to go. That's not getting high percentage shots. That there is something that is not translating from practice to the game. Syracuse does a game day shoot around now. In the Jim Boeheim era, they never did that. In the Autry era, they do. They're on the West Coast this time, but they start slow when all they got to do is walk 5 minutes on campus to the JMA Wireless Dome. That is on Autry. That is coaching. That this team is never ready to go, that this team looks flat, and it takes them too long to get into the game. Why is it that consistently teams start strong against Syracuse, find their groove against Syracuse, and then they either have to call a timeout before that first TV timeout or they have to readjust? Everybody has to make adjustments during games, but this is just ridiculous at this point, how often this team has to dig itself a hole, and yet they find the moments, they find the streaks, they kind of flirt with being competitive in these games. But I'm sorry, when you're down by 23 points, had they won that game, we'd be having a different conversation, but with a lot of yeah buts. Like, why are you still consistently falling behind early in the game? The points off turnovers is another thing. This team has just consistently turned the ball over. It happened again tonight. Yet you look at the box score, Syracuse's bench points, 32-16. Carlos certainly had a big chunk of that, about half of those points, right? But they're getting scoring off the bench. They shot better than Stanford in this game, 47-44. Syracuse shot 23 of 49. Stanford shot 24 of 54. Stanford only took, 5-6 more shots than Syracuse? 3-point line. Stanford, 7 of 23, 30%. Syracuse, 6 of 19, 32%. So it's not like they were white hot from the 3-point line and Syracuse couldn't keep pace. If anything, they were missing a bunch of threes that in a more reasonable deficit, Syracuse could have got back in this thing. But they give away too many points, and they just, game after game, are not ready to play. That's on Autry. That's on this coaching staff. They have got to figure it out. I don't know if you shape up the starting lineup again. I don't know if you, some people do this. I can't do this because it messes with me. Some people will set their clock 10 or 15 minutes ahead just to so they'll be on time. My wife does this. She lives 10 minutes in the future. I can't do that. I have to know what time it is exactly. But some people do this. They'll set their clocks ahead 10, 15 minutes, and that keeps them on time. I don't know. The tip time tonight was 11 o'clock Eastern time. Maybe Autry should have told him it was 10:45. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but they have got to figure it out because 16 of 21 games this year, they have trailed at that under 16 timeout. They didn't score in the first 8 minutes of this game. So clearly something's amiss. The easy answer there is get high percentage shots. Get high percentage in the paint buckets. Go inside. Not easy to do with Maxime Reynaud looming in the paint in this game. I understand that. But here's another game where Jair Davis, 7 points, 6 rebounds in 24 minutes. You need more from your interior scoring. When Donnie Freeman, who missed yet another game for Syracuse, Mr. Day-to-Day, right? I mean, I'm getting to the point where I don't think we're going to see Donnie Freeman anymore. That's just speculation on my part. he did make the trip to the West Coast, but the more he sits, the more you have to think we're not going to see him on the court again this season. Chance Westery, who's he? He's like a mystery at this point, though he is still technically with the team. So yes, injuries aside, but when your primary scorer, your big-time guy, J.J. Starling, struggles, and I don't think it was a case, remember when J.J. struggled a couple games back and he was very upset in the locker room, and he was talking about how he got punked in that game and he got defended well in this game? I don't think it was that case. He had shots. He had shots in the paint. He took more threes than anybody on this team tonight, 1 of 7 from three-point. They just weren't dropping. Like, you're going to have those bad games. You're going to have those bad shooting nights. There were some Syracuse fans there. There were some Let's Go Orange chants building up. Some of those West Coast Syracuse fans making the trip to Stanford. I don't think the arena was a little more than half filled. But, man, if Syracuse doesn't dig itself a 23-point hole, that's just what we're going to keep coming back to in this game. So now, speaking of digging a hole, you're digging a hole in what your season is. 9-12, 3-7. They are clearly heading for a losing season at this pace, short of some miraculous turnaround here. So now you have to salvage this West Coast trip by grabbing a win against Cal on Saturday night, and then you come home on Wednesday and you play Duke. So Maxime Reynaud, 21-15. What's Cooper Flagg going to do in the paint against this team, right? You going to be ready to play that one? I know it's a Wednesday night, not a typical weekend game against Duke, but man, how this team just consistently is not ready to play befuddles me. It happens to everybody once in a while. Sometimes, you go to work and you're not ready to go right at 9 o'clock or whatever the case may be. This team does it all the time. All the time. They're never ready to play, ever. And today it really bit him in the behind, because once they stabilized a little bit, and look, Carlos is not the best defender in the world, but at least somebody was. Now, there were a couple times there was a big turnover that Carlos had, dribbled, throws kind of a limp pass. It gets part of those 14 turnovers, that led to 19 points off turnovers for Stanford. But he had a couple of threes. He was taking it in the paint. Somebody had to light the fuse. When your starters, JJ at 7, Lucas Taylor at 3, Jair Davis at 7, Eddie Lampkin with 12. When your starters are lagging like that, and Kyle Cuff couldn't give this team the punch off the bench he usually does. He only plays 8 minutes. Chris Bell, the enigma of this team, only has 6 points, 2 of 5 from three-point range. I think the Maestro had a typical game that he has 17 points, 17 minutes, 4 points, 3 rebounds. He had a couple turnovers, he had a couple bad calls. This was not a well-officiated game. I'm not even close to going there for a factor in this game when you're trailing by 23, but there was a lot of illegal screens and moving screens and some things that typically don't get called that got called too much in this game. The Maestro had a couple of questionable foul calls on him, but man, this team it has its moments, but it just can't put a string together that matters. And especially when you're digging yourself a 23-point hole, that what are you going to do when you're constantly chasing and trying to run some semblance of an offense, and you got to press and you got to run a pressure defense? And did I think they were going to win this game even when they were trailing only by 6 at what timeout was it? It was like 3:23 to go in the second half, and you're like, I don't know, man. They're only trailing by 6. This could be something, especially with the cold spurts that Stanford would go on in this game that would allow Syracuse to hit 6 of 7, 8 of 9. Meanwhile, Stanford would be shooting 1 of 10. I gave you the numbers of how it ended up here. The second half actually ended up being tied 37-37 after you trailed at halftime, 33-24 after you trailed 25-2 in the first half. A lot of people went to bed, though. People are going to wake up on Thursday morning. They're going to listen to this podcast. They're going to, however you get it, look on Twitter, whatever the case may be, and they'll be like, whoa, they only lost by 9? In the way it was trailing? You want to pat them on the back for that? You want to compliment them for that? But I don't know. You just fall short of giving this team the full complement of I don't even want to say what they deserve. It's like, congratulations on not getting your doors blown off. In a game you trailed by 23. That just put such a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. Like, hey, you made a little run, you got back into it. But I think that had more to do with Stanford. Couldn't hit water if it fell out of a boat for some reason after it came out and took a 25-2 lead in this game. The other thing at this point that I would be concerned about is and I don't want to speculate. I haven't talked to him about this. I haven't talked to anybody around him about this, but it's just common sense to wonder about in the portal era. Is Elijah Moore going to stick this out? He played 5 minutes in this game. I get that Carlos was playing as well as anybody could in this game. JJ was struggling, but you needed 3-point shooters out there. You needed to overcome a big deficit. Moore is one of those guys. And look, I've said it before. I feel like there are moments, and Kyle Cuff wasn't killing it either. He only plays 8 minutes in this game. So I get the Carlos thing in this instance, even though, again, you have to trade off his defense for what he can bring you on the offensive end in this game. But you've got to kind of take the lumps with Elijah Moore. Is he, and I may be answering my own question as I ask it, but it has to be said, is he that bad defensively? Is he that much of a liability? And is Carlos that much better defensively that Elijah Moore, as we get to turn the calendar to February, a starter on this team only plays 5 minutes? If I'm Elijah Moore, I'm starting to wonder, what kind of role do I have on this team? Do I stick this out? Does my game evolve? Does this staff believe? I think they believe in him. I mean, certainly they're working with him. It's not like they're abandoning him or anything. But we're in the portal era. And if he continues to only play 5, 8, 10 minutes, look, they gave him the status as a starter, and I think they'll continue to give him that and hope he kind of gets on a hot streak and starts shooting his way out of this. And I'm not saying that Elijah Moore was killing it out there, but the more we look at these box scores and we see he's only got 5, 7, 8 minutes, that's not good for a starting player on this team. People say it doesn't matter who starts. It matters who's in the game in the second half. I actually happen to believe in that most of the time, but this is something they have got to monitor and be careful about, or they're going to lose somebody who I think is going to be a really good player. But to be fair, we're about to flip to February, and he's still very much a freshman. And this is the time of year when freshmen are supposed to become sophomores and get it and stabilize and know where they need to be. And he is somebody that he's struggling on defense. There's no question about that, right? So maybe you write it off in this game because Carlos was so good off the bench and you had to keep him out there because somebody had to score, somebody had to put out some resemblance of an offense. But the more we look at these box scores after the game, and you only see anytime it's less than, I'd say, 12 minutes for Elijah Moore, you got to be concerned. Not about this year, about next year. Is he on this team next year, and is he a part of this thing in the transactional era? Our Syracuse Sports Insiders, speaking of which, Antonio leads us off with some, I mean, you got to laugh, otherwise you're going to cry. Antonio says, I think I'm finally seeing Autry's strategy. He's playing for a better draft pick. Do you get draft picks in the portal era? I mean, maybe that's next with all the craziness in college basketball. Speaking of which, if you had told me 2 years ago that we would be watching Syracuse play Stanford in a ACC league game that tipped off at 11 o'clock Eastern time, let's just say I would have had a lot of questions. Even in the craziness of the portal era, the NIL era, and the realignment era in college sports, I would have grabbed a thermometer and shoved it in your mouth and said, are you feeling okay? But Syracuse is on a West Coast trip in the Atlantic Coast Conference playing league games against Stanford and Cal on Saturday night with 11 o'clock tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern time tip on Saturday. Welcome to college basketball in 2025, right? Was I having a fever dream or did we actually watch that tonight? Yeah, that's where we're at here. Frankie S. says it's going to be February next week. Next week? How about this weekend, pal? And this team is still a train wreck on offense and defense and at the free throw line. Said, I'm dating myself here, but I'm sounding like a broken record. Another ill-prepared start completely does this team in. I have no faith of them getting that West Coast split they need at Cal. As Yogi used to say, it's getting late early. Seth B says, not a good idea to spot the home team a 23-point lead if you want to win. Cuse goes on some runs, but nothing is sustained. Seth adds, and this team is out-hustled too much. Like that late rebound by Stanford with a minute left, this team is heading for a historically bad record. That late rebound was killer. If you want to look at kind of the micro of this game, there was still a chance they could have pulled off something. Like we mentioned, down by 6, down the stretch. So they miss that 3. So Eddie Lampkin hits some free throws. It's 67-60. They miss a 3. You get a possession, go the other way, hit a 3 yourself, cut it to 67-63. Maybe you got something. You got to play the free throw game and the back and forth, and you got to stop the clock. But that missed 3 was killer because Stanford, now you have to foul at that point, and the clock was in their hands, and they iced it down the stretch. But again, considering the deficit they had to crawl out of, if it was a more reasonable deficit, maybe, and again, they cut it to 6, even though they were down by 23 at one point. But man, if you're chasing that much, you're just putting yourself at a big-time disadvantage. Jake M. says, spot him a 20-point lead. It was 23, actually. End up shooting better from the field and from 3. And bad teams find new ways to lose. Mahir says, I'm passionate about Syracuse basketball. I don't care too much about football. When is the administration going to wake up and do something about the fact that we've been so bad for the last 4 years? As fans that pay and make the effort to show up, we deserve better than this. I'm done. I'm angry, and I'm very frustrated right now. I get it. I hear you. I'm with you. Are they going to do anything about it? No. Adrian Autry's coaching this team next year. Whether you agree or disagree with that, whether you think that should be the case or not, he's coaching this team next year. I just don't see John Wildhack making a change. They're going to, they could lose every game the rest of the season. Maybe that's a different conversation because you only have 9 wins if that's the case, but they're going to let Autry ride this out with Sadiq White, with Kiyan Anthony. Luke Fennell, by the way, from the Australian recruit they're bringing in, had 31 points in I think it's the under-20 tournament in Australia. There's somebody who I think you maybe have to add into, Sadiq White is a top 30 player in the country. Kiyan Anthony is in the top 35 in the latest ESPN top 100 rankings. Those guys are the headliners, but Luke he's coming in. He's going to score. So at least help seems to be on the way. Relief seems to be on the way. But you're banking a lot on those guys to break what will be, I think, a 4-year drought out of the NCAA tournament. And let's call a spade a spade. Those guys have to come in and save Autry's job. But he's coaching next year. So people are asking me, why aren't you calling for a coaching change? I'm like, because I don't want to waste my time, right? Because I know it's not going to happen. But if John Wildhack wants to surprise us all and put some more heat on Autry, draw a line in the sand, which he won't do. Wildhack is so milquetoast on these things, there's no way he would do that. But the fan base is getting pretty frustrated. Mahir speaks for a lot of people out there, especially if this continues in this team. I am befuddled. It's February, and this team's never ready to play. 16-21 games, that stat that Ben gave us a little earlier. Let's see. Where do we leave off? From Robbie T, who says, they play hard for Red. They don't quit. We've gotten better, but not good enough. They can't put together a full game effort, and the slow start tonight gave us the deficit they couldn't quite overcome. From Thomas J, who says, Brent, Red is making it easy to limit sleep in this loss. I cannot figure out why his teams come out looking so unprepared. He just needs to be better. No D, no movement, and he looks lost. And look, Red said this after a recent game, their lack of movement. Why that continues to be an issue. It's one thing on offense when somebody's trying to ISO and has the hot hand and you're trying to get out of their way, but you still, I'm thinking of that one turnover where Carlos dribble, right down to about 12 seconds on the shot clock. He drives in, throws a limp pass to Peter, and it's turnover. That's why you have, in this case, 19 points off turnovers. Those lazy passes, lack of movement on offense. Certainly there's a lack of movement on defense at times when it needs to be there. That last rebound, Chris Bell's staring at that thing come off the rim, right? There's just too much of that. They have their moments of brilliance where you're like, man, this looks like a team, but way too many others where they don't. And that's the problem. So I like the contrast there between what Robbie said, what Mahir said, and what Thomas J just said there. Steve B says, metaphorically, basketball is a chess game. Red continues to be predictable and gets zagged for every zig in the first 10 minutes. To his credit, he makes decent in-game adjustments. The best part, Brent, about being an insider is I can annoy you when everyone else is sleeping. The best $4 a month I've ever spent. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate everybody that hung out late into the night or early into the morning, however you want to look at it, with this one here. And that is the best part about being a Syracuse Sports Insider. I'm there. I didn't ping our Syracuse Sports Insiders too much during the game because I knew it was a late one for a lot of you guys. I didn't want your phone buzzing if you were trying to sleep. But you're welcome to text me because, I'll be watching the game. Now, programming notes, Saturday night, Syracuse plays Cal. There's not going to be a post-game show. I'm on lacrosse duty that day. So I'll say this, though. I'll more than likely be up watching the game. So if you guys want to text me, you're more than welcome to. But we're not going to do there's no post-game show. I'm not technically covering the game Saturday night. But if you guys want to text away, Syracuse Sports Insiders, and chances are I'll probably shoot you a text back. But just so you guys know, no post-game show Saturday night after SU Cal because I'm on lacrosse duty earlier that day. So that will be my official working title on Saturday. Yeah, lacrosse, relief, a good team, an entertaining team, a team that I think can really make a run here coming up. I could be wrong, but boy, that team's loaded and they're fun and they're experienced and there's a lot of talent there and they got a hard schedule just like the football team does. But I'm telling you, man, lacrosse team, I think they're going to do some special things this year. So at least that's coming in to kind of break up the monotony a little bit here because this basketball team, just more often than not, is more frustrating than they are fun. A couple more from our Syracuse Sports Insiders here. Eugene says this team has no identity. The unwillingness by the coaching staff to commit to the zone defense is disappointing. You don't have to do things differently than Coach Boeheim to make your mark. Now, I think Eugene is right when he says this team has no identity. Where I disagree with Eugene, politely, Eugene, who is watching from Hawaii tonight, by the way. Shout out to Eugene, those West Coasters. Mark in San Diego, my boy Nick. I'm going to leave out some of you guys, but our West Coasters that were enjoying the normal start time on their coast and their time zone was enjoying this. So shout out to Eugene who was in Hawaii watching this thing. But where I disagree with you is I don't think the zone's the answer. I think you do have to differentiate yourself from Boeheim. They still have not found their identity. Whatever this orange standard is, whatever Autry is trying to mold this thing into, he hasn't found it. I'm seeing the same stuff that I saw at the end of the Boeheim era with some noticeable differences. So I don't agree with Eugene that Back to the Future is the answer, that the zone necessarily is the answer. The zone is the answer when it matches X's and O's wise and you need it, and it's a matchup advantage. I'm not saying you never break that out, but they do need an identity, and they do need something, and I have been beating this dead horse, and I'll grab a stick and beat it some more. You've got to give this fan base something to attach themselves to, something to believe in. They have to know what they're watching. They have to know what they're a part of, okay? Football, dart, boom, in, right? They feel like you have to put it on a T-shirt. And I don't know what I'm buying, if I'm buying the Orange Standard T-shirt. If anything, that works against you because I get the texts every game when this stuff happens. Oh, there's the Orange Standard, right? So that's backfiring on you that your Orange Standard is now this, what we're seeing. Down 25-2 in the first half. No identity, no movement on offense, no movement on defense. Again, they have their moments. They made it a game. They cut it to 6. It'd be one thing if this was just a complete waste of time. It ended up somewhat being worth it to stay up and watch this thing. So you got to give them credit where it's due. Some of the adjustments they do make, they tied the second half, like they made this a game. No doubt about it. But when Carlos is your leading scorer, when your starters are that off, when one of your best freshmen and one of your higher rated recruits to come in recent years, one of which is out for the 8th straight game with a foot injury, and I don't think we're going to see again this year, and the other one's playing 5 minutes, and there's just so much you're still trying to figure out. This, not only this late in this season, but we're getting pretty late early, to use Frankie's term from earlier, in the Autry era here. And nobody knows what they're watching, and nobody knows what to believe in, and nobody knows what this thing is, right? It took, and I know it's not an apples to apples, or in this case, oranges to oranges comparison, okay? It took Fran Brown 1 season to establish an identity, to bring in a highly rated and respectable recruiting class, to make a strike in the transfer portal. Mind you, he knew Kyle McCord and had history with Kyle McCord, and there was a lot of advantages built in there. But man, heading into year 2 with one of the more impossible schedules in college football, you got a fan base that is well behind you, and winning 10 games helps, gives you a little leverage. But every football fan I talk to is like, man, with that schedule, if they win 6 or 7 games, I'm going to take that and run. Realistically, right? You get a lot of, there's some homers and some real diehards out there. It's like, what do you mean they can't win 10 games? You got to be realistic here, right? But you have the leverage of, I know what I believe in. I know what I'm investing in. I know what I'm watching. I'm realistic. I know what that schedule is. Right? Like, you have all this in your back pocket if you're Fran Brown. Autry is none of that. He has lost a lot of that goodwill. He has lost a lot of that belief from the, and why would you? Why would you just give the blind faith to what you're seeing? What they're doing is not connecting. It's not giving people a reason to ride it out, other than what you have coming in that recruiting class, right? That is something. The deeper you dig your hole, and I'm not just talking about this game when you were down by 23, but I'm talking about lack of identity. You know what the one identity they have is? They start slow. When that's your identity, that's a problem, right? As we're about to flip to February here, when these things, this is the time of year when you're either getting better and you're becoming a team, and there are elements of this team that are. I'm not discounting some of that we've talked about in some other games, or you're taking on too much water and the boat's sinking. You're 9-12, 3-7 in ACC play. You've got to pull a win out against Cal. And you got Duke on Wednesday night at the Dome. I'm not even going to try and give you that speech that it's sports and anything can happen and all that. If we're wrong about that, great. It'll be one of the great stories of the year. But come on. How are you going to win that game when you can barely scratch out a competitive match? And Stanford's good. Stanford is now 12-1 at home. Raynaud is one of the best players in the league. Like, Stanford's legit. That's an NCAA tournament team. We probably watched out there tonight, so I'm not trying to discount Stanford, but man, Syracuse just goes out there time after time after time, and you say to yourself, I know it's weird because of who they were playing and where they were playing, and things are weird and off and not what we're used to in college basketball, like on the surface, but people don't know what this team is anymore. They don't know what Syracuse basketball is anymore. They don't know what that orange standard is, and you better figure it out because it's getting late early in that case. It's getting pretty early and late time-wise on this podcast, so I think we'll wrap it up there for this edition of Syracuse Basketball Postgame, presented by Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. Thanks to everybody that stayed up late with us during the game and here on the pod, but certainly by subscribing on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can listen and watch on demand, especially in cases like this, when as much as you love the show, you don't love it enough to stay up till 2 a.m. to check it out. Don't blame me at all, but that's why you subscribe and you can listen and check out the pod when you want on demand. So a couple programming notes. One, I mentioned earlier, no post-game show Saturday after SU Cal. We are doing a live pod Thursday, which is today, technically, as I speak. I think we're going to do it about 3 o'clock again. as got a couple things going on Thursday afternoon, including, speaking of lacrosse, got some lacrosse players I'm going to go talk to on Thursday. So our live pod Thursday, we're going to try and do this every week, somewhere around 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Just hop on and talk about what's going on. We'll certainly have a little more on this game. I'm going to do my lacrosse preview on the live pod on Thursday. People are still buzzing about football in terms of the schedule. And boy, the Kyle McCord, LaQuint Allen, Jackson Meeks, a lot of these guys, the Rondé Gatson certainly are popping. So you got the Shrine Bowl in Dallas, which is Thursday night, and you got the Senior Bowl this weekend, which LaQuint Allen and Justin Barron will play in. A lot of NFL draft buzz and a lot of guys rising up the charts at their respective all-star games. So we'll talk about that on the live pod as well. So that's coming up 3 o'clock on Thursday. No post-game show Saturday for SU Cal, okay, just so you guys know. Please subscribe, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Please become a Syracuse Sports Insider so you can text me directly, even at 2 in the morning, to rant about Syracuse sports. Your thoughts, your opinions, your questions, your comments. You get my exclusive commentary. If I have breaking news, you get it first, and the amazing back and forth and the community that we are building. Some of the more passionate Syracuse sports fans out there. Join subtext.com/Syracuse Sports is the website. You can also text the word orange to 315-847-3895. It's just $3.99 a month. As Steve Beast, let me put it back on the screen, right? The best part about being an insider is I can annoy you when everyone else is sleeping. The best $4 a month I've ever spent. There you go, Steve. Appreciate that endorsement. We would love for you to be like Steve and be a Syracuse Sports Insider, and you're not annoying me. Never. Even this late into the night. We'll end on that note. Thank you for hanging. Thank you for watching. Syracuse loses to Stanford 70-61. This has been Syracuse Basketball Postgame presented by Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. We'll catch you next time, guys.